More jobs were created than expected, and unemployment was lower than expected. How do you interpret them?
David, these were good numbers. They showed an economy that, at least as of November, was still looking pretty robust. Some of the greatest fears that the economy was turning over certainly look to have been falsified by this number. The fact that average hourly earnings were running at 0.4%, bit more than was expected, reinforces my sense that people need to be careful about declaring the war against inflation as having been won. They need to be nervous about what could happen from supply shocks, from other adverse developments. But I read these as a pretty favorable number. They certainly make a soft landing look more in play, although I certainly think it would be a mistake to treat a soft landing as something we can take for granted or be confident about.
What do they say to the Fed, do you think, Larry? Because on the one hand, you say, boy, this is a pretty robust labor economy. We don't need to cut too soon, and people were expecting some cuts. And as you say on inflation, there are some indications inflation is ticking back up. We have an Atlanta Fed that says that, and they had the UMich consumer sentiment this week indicated that it really dropped the consumer expectations for inflation for 1 year out.
Look, I think the Fed's got to be very careful. Progress has been made against inflation, but they've got to make sure that it keeps being made, and they've got to make sure that once it's made, it's entrenched and locked in. And I think this will make it easier for them to do that. They've got a very tricky problem at the Fed, because whenever people conclude that it's looking good, that we're not going to need more rate increases, long rates come way down, and the stock market has a tendency to go up, and that then undoes some of the tightening that they have already put in place. So I think it's very hard to know what's going to happen. I still think the market is a bit overpricing how much easing the Fed's going to decide it can prudently undertake. But those issues are very much at the margin, unlike the situation we had a couple of years ago, where it seemed to me the Fed was very far off. So I think the Fed's in broadly the right place of watchful waiting. But the moment they turn or announce they're going to turn is going to be a seismic moment. And for that reason, they probably need to be very deliberative and careful about getting to that point and waiting until they see some overwhelming evidence of inflation being locked in low, or see some real evidence of the economy turning over. And I don't think we have either of those at this point.
Larry, let's turn to something that's very much in the news once again this week, and you have spoken out about it, and that is the rise of antisemitism, at least on some college campuses. We had the 3 university presidents go down and appear in Congress from your own Harvard, as well as MIT and Penn. And if they meant to put an end to this, they certainly did not succeed as of right now. It looks like, if anything, got to be more so. But this is one of my questions. You ran Harvard. You were a president there, but you also were at very senior levels in the government. When things start to go off the rails, when you start to lose control of the narrative, how do you get it back? Because we have everybody now wanting to run universities for the college presidents, whether it's Congress or whether contributors or whatever. How do you regain control of the narrative?
I think this is as difficult a moment for elite higher education as any moment since the Vietnam War period, perhaps more difficult. I think everybody needs to take a bit of a deep breath. I've had considerable sympathy with some of the things that have been said by both people in the government and by some of the billionaires, some of the donors to these universities. But even when the concerns are warranted, it's very important for us to remember that if universities start being run by politicians or by small groups of large donors, that's going to be a very problematic thing over time for the American university system, which is a huge source of strength for our country. That said, David, we have to recognize that there's been a double standard in how incidents of racism have been regarded in the past, incidents of what people call microaggressions, incidents of things that make people feel hurt or sensitive have been regarded in the past, and the way things that are abhorrent to the sensibilities of so many of us have been regarded in the last several months. And that double standard, which in different ways has been present on many campuses, creates an extremely difficult situation. I do not side with those who believe that the answer is simply to ratchet up the protections and condemnations of speech which is offensive, to include Jewish students more fully in what has happened in the past. Indeed, I think a substantial part of what we're seeing is in a way related to errors that have taken place in the past, where there has been a tendency to adopt as norms certain ideologies that regard themselves as very progressive. And so I think we all need to step back, and it's not going to get done in a week or a month, and think about the task of norm setting. And I use that word very carefully, David, because I think if you're debating whether people get to say the vilest things with or without being punished, you've lost. The real challenge is to create a climate where people don't want to say those things. And that's a matter of moral leadership. It's a matter of guidance. In part, it's a matter of education. You know, look at a number of the schools that were represented at that hearing. How many thoughtful dialogues have been convened by their leaders with leading experts from around the world to discuss these things in front of students? Not very many, as best I can tell.